The new Arkham City Batman from McFarlane may not be worth it to you, and here's why. Everyone, just letting you know that all figures found in this review could be found over at bigbadtoystore.com. Links could be found in the description below, and if you guys use them, they help out the channel quite a bit. 11 years ago, we got one of the most seminal superhero and Batman video games ever made, Batman Arkham City. A lot of people's game of the year of that year, despite also being a banger with Uncharted 3 and Skyrim. And it's 11 years later that McFarlane Toys gives us a brand new wave of Arkham City figures through its DC Multiverse line, and on top of that, it ends up being a Build-A-Figure wave composing of pieces that can make up the Solomon Grundy Mega Figure. Now, even though we're getting brand new figures that we've never seen before for some of the side characters in that game, I was honestly the most eager to check out Batman once more, because even though I already owned the Arkham Asylum version, I really wanted to see how it compares to a brand new iteration of that figure through the Arkham City interpretation of that costume. So I wanted to clarify first and foremost that this is most notably going to be a comparison video as opposed to a proper review of the figure, even though I'm going to try my absolute best to re-review this reissue. So if you guys want to see a much more in-depth version of this particular sculpt, I'm going to have the original Arkham Asylum figure review from McFarlane Toys tagged either during the end screen or as a pinned comment down below. First, I want to make it clear that this is still nevertheless a great figure that fully embodies and represents what I personally believe to be one of the best interpretations of Batman across different mediums, from video games to movies, etc. I've always loved this costume because it's kind of like a blend of the new with the old. It kind of houses a lot of characteristics from that old school look of Batman with the gray on black, but at the same time it kind of modernizes it and makes sure that it doesn't look all that silly like Adam West or any of the older interpretations. And whether it be with the original Arkham Asylum version or this brand new reissue, you still get that message across with the way that the paint applications, the sculpting, and the detail is brought forth in this version. And McFarlane still was able to give us a really good full-fleshed figure representing the Arkham Rocksteady design from the 7-inch scale. And you can see that coming full force here with the embodiment, the sculpting, the musculature, as well as an awful lot of the little divots and little armor pieces making up the costume in the middle, to make it clear that this is still something that will definitely not only take a punch, but maybe even a bullet. And all throughout, you can see a lot of that sculpting coming through. However, much like with the original Arkham Asylum figure, one of my nitpicks is how slightly lanky those legs look. If you've seen the concept design as well as the actual character model from the Rocksteady Batman, you'll notice that the guy's a bit of a beefcake. And I never really understood why McFarlane gave him some lanky legs that make him look like he skipped out on leg day. I don't know why, but it just, to me, always kind of bothered me, especially when how much buffer his chest and his bicep muscles really are. So it feels like it's a little at odds with itself. And it's kind of carried over here, once again, the Arkham City version, but at least an awful lot of the things that really worked on that initial interpretation are still carried on over here, and because of that, it still has a worthwhile presence to him. Those legs, however, do look slightly better to the naked eye when you kind of, this is going to sound wrong, but you spread them a little bit. When you put them kind of side to side and straight on down, they do kind of give off that lanky form of physique, but when you kind of spread them, they at least look a little bit better as far as posability and giving him a much more worthwhile look. So I guess in that respect, we should definitely tackle the articulation, which is very representative of that original figure. The head is able to rotate 360 degrees smoothly, as well as being able to tilt upwards and downwards very fairly, and even side to side. The arms are technically able to rotate vertically, but of course, the way that the cape kind of covers up the top part of the shoulder is going to limit that almost all the way through, so it's only able to lift up about that far up. But of course, extension is still very fluid towards the sides as far as the cape allows it. You do have a butterfly joint in the middle of the shoulders there that allows some shrugging motion, as well as being able to shift the shoulder ball joints up and down. And then of course, you are also going to have a bicep cut that allows it to swivel 360 degrees all the way across there. But much like the original Arkham Asylum figure, something that was definitely carried on through that I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of is only having one joint at the elbow, so it's only able to bend at a even 90-degree angle. And once again, the ball joints that were indicative of that era of McFarlane that are completely different than the ones that they're sporting now with the cylindrical design. You have the ball joint that technically still allows the wrists to rotate 360 degrees as well as slightly pivot inwards and upwards. Nevertheless, you still get a decent mid-torso cut that allows an awful lot of fluid mobility, being able to rotate 360 degrees as well as crunch very decently inwards and extend all the way towards the back and from side to side. You do get a waist joint that allows it to rotate fully 360 degrees, and then the ball joints at the top of those lanky legs do allow full extension towards the front, the back, as well as very evenly, almost to the 180-degree angle, to the sides. And one of the reasons why I found it perplexing to only have one joint at the elbow is because you still get the two joints at the knees that allow the bottom of the leg to fully bend all the way upwards and towards the back. Unfortunately, no form of boot cut or swivels, but you do get ball joints once again in the ankles that, even though I would have liked to have had the most recently coveted and very respected cylindrical design, you still get the ball joints here doing a pretty decent job of being able to allow the ankle to rotate 360 degrees as well as pivot downwards about a couple of notches and upwards as well. And then, much like that original Arkham Asylum design, you get some toesies here that are kind of midways through the boot, and they actually bend upwards very gently, but also, I don't know what it is, but there's something about it that just feels very smooth and satisfying to the touch. Can't explain it, but it feels really good. So it's very vivid that the articulation here is pretty much one-to-one with the original Arkham Asylum. And frankly, that's kind of the problem, because there was a very clear and ample opportunity here to swap some of those joints, specifically the wrist and ankle ones, for the cylindrical design that they're now sporting in some of the more recent Batman figures that I've been covering, like Speeding Bullets, even the ankles on Atrocitus, Injustice 2 Batman that sports those brand new designs for the mid-cut or halfway cut joints that looks a little bit more natural to the human body, but still allows the full mobility that those points of articulation generally do. So that's kind of where in lies the full comparison that we're going to go ahead and get into with that original Arkham Asylum McFarlane toys that was released a couple years back. Like I said, it's pretty much one-to-one scale of being the same figure. In terms of sculpt, in terms of detailing, in terms of pretty much borrowing pieces, specifically those limbs, like the biceps, the shoulders, and those lanky legs, they're going to be very, very familiar because they're pretty much the exact same figure. You'll full on see right here through visuals and one-to-one comparison close-up shots that it's pretty much the exact same Batman, albeit a couple of very obvious differences. Starting from the top, you'll definitely notice that the face has been revamped, and to me, this is arguably one of the best improvements they could have done with the Arkham City figure, because you'll notice here that the bottom of the face, specifically around the mouth area, has been overhauled to pretty much just look much more natural. One of the things that I never liked about that Arkham Asylum Batman, despite being one of my favorite McFarlanes, is that face. It just looks way too puffy, and it looks like it's just being anchored towards the front, like someone's literally taking this face and just pulling it towards the front, and I personally never really liked that look. Here, it looks much more natural. You have a bit of more of a chiseled look to his facial features, something that's a bit more reminiscent of his character model in the game, and because of that, it just looks much more natural both in person and on screen. The ears were shortened just a tad, but they do look a little pointier and much more screen accurate. And then of course there's the elephant in the room here, the eyes. There's obviously no pupils, they're all completely whited out, and depending on who you ask, some people will like this, some people will not like it. I think it's just a matter of preference. I personally like to have the eyes etched in there, but I understand the reason behind it, the reason or the explanation they give off as to why it is that they decided to go with this look is because it's supposed to be how he looks like when he has detective mode on. I understand that, and I do like a little bit of the homage to the original look of Batman whenever he's put in some kind of animated scenario or in a video game or in the comics where he's got the whited out eyes. But my OCD just wants kind of a much more default look to how he looks like in the game, which means he needs to have in the pupilled eyes. But being that I already had the Arkham Asylum version, having a change of pace with the whited out eyes is a nice little variation. As we go on down, you'll notice that the bat symbol has also been overhauled. You can definitely see how it looks a bit more respective to the character model in game. Very much different from the original version of the Arkham Asylum, which was a point of contention in the comments section of that video. This version is actually a lot closer to, I would say, the logo of the game, but not so much the character model. The character model, the bat symbol on that guy kind of looks a little skinnier, especially around the wingspan area. This version is a little bit on the girthier side, so if you want to go by accuracy, I would say that technically the Arkham Asylum version is a bit more accurate, but this one is a bit more closer resembling the Arkham logo. So at this point, you really need to take your pick. Underneath the bat logo, however, you'll notice that his chest is a little bit wider. I noticed it's very, very subtle, but you'll notice he's got a little bit more of a puff going on underneath there amongst the pecs. And also, I really respect that much like the original Arkham Asylum, it's not a painted on decal, it's an actual piece lifted up from the plastic. The gauntlets have also been remodeled to look more accurate to the one from the Arkham City version, with a little bit of the gadgetry going on along here on the top part, so I can really respect that they didn't just copy and paste the same exact Arkham Asylum gauntlets, because there's a very distinctive look. It's actually one of the things that people point out as amongst differences of the costume, and I really respect that they pretty much carried that over here, as well as the chrome paints you can see on his knuckles that really make them stand out versus the original kind of brush metal you can just see on the top of the gloves there. So at least they kind of pointed out some things there that feel minimalistic and simple, but also very effective. Can't say the same for arguably one of my least liked or least favorite things about this reissue, the belt. The sculpting is still there from that original model, and it looks pretty much one-to-one as far as scaling and detail for the Arkham City costume. But I really dislike, damn near hate, that paint application. Why do we need to cut back on the metallic gold that the Arkham Asylum version had? And I looked at the character model for Arkham City. It's got the gold metallic brush to it. So frankly, I'm kind of failing to understand why they kind of got rid of it altogether and gave him this khaki Levi's kind of look to the paint on his utility belts. I just don't like it whatsoever. The rest of the figure plays out as usual. You even got the boots that are pretty much one-to-one scaled identical, except you will notice that they're a bit more blackened out. They're missing a little bit of that gunmetal finish that the original Arkham Asylum figure had. And sadly, before we're done with the differences, we get to one last very noticeable difference that is also one of my biggest cons with this reissue, the cape. I kind of hate it. I'm sorry. I never really liked this wavy design that some Batman figures from McFarlane come with. I like my default straight down capes. I don't like the stylized version because then it kind of forces some postures and posability that caters to the cape, but when you don't pose them in that particular manner, the cape just kind of stands out as like a sore thumb. And so I never really been a huge fan of this kind of design where it's kind of waving off into the distance, let alone a little bit of the perforation going on right here in the middle. You can kind of see where the two pieces of rubber were kind of gelled together, so I don't like how that's at least very noticeable on the outside. If you're going to put that at least a little bit on the inside. You can't really notice it on the inside, but very clear right there on the outside. That just makes it look all the more artificial, and it just feels kind of flimsy and tacked on. I don't know why. I just really do not like this cape, and I'm hoping for some improvements in the future. You'll also notice that the overall color scheme that he's got going on, specifically with the gray portions of his suit, are a little bit on the lighter side. I don't know if that was intentional or if maybe that's a thing going on with mass production. Personally, I don't mind it. I just recognize the shading going on with the Arkham Asylum version to just be, technically speaking, a little bit more screen accurate. But if we're tackling color accuracy, I would even argue that the most accurate as far as figure color perspective for the Arkham City character model is actually not from McFarlane at all. Let's go ahead and compare the Arkham City from McFarlane Toys with the Arkham City figure from DC Collectibles. You can see right here that there's a very distinct and noticeable differences between the two. Obviously, you're going to have height differences, detail and sculpt, and of course, when it comes to the actual production and budget behind the sculpting and detailing and quality you get out of the actual look of the character, McFarlane's got this in the bag. but I will give DC Collectibles some points for, in my opinion, getting the most screen-accurate look as far as color for their version of the Arkham City Batman. Specifically, that belt. Yes, it's not accurate with the pockets and the little middle button that kind of clips everything together, but at least it's got that gold metal brush, and the gray on the costume is actually more muted to how it looks like in the game, at least from certain angles. But objectively, I will note that the McFarlane is going to be the better figure as far as detailing, production, and most definitely articulation. Being able to maneuver the DC Collectibles figure without the ability to either twist the legs or bend them or extend them in a specific way, specifically with those bicep swivels, is daunting, especially when you take into consideration this is an 11-year-old figure, and at any moment, any of those limbs will give out. But at least I'll gladly sacrifice that articulation if it means having a very cool cape that I can get behind, because that style of cape is arguably what I would have wanted for something like McFarlane, and unfortunately, in my perception, they weren't able to achieve that. And just for shits and giggles, let's go ahead and compare Arkham City McFarlane Batman here with the Arkham Knight McFarlane, and obviously, it's not even a competition. You'll definitely notice that these are two completely distinctly different figures, and there cannot be a stark contrast between the two, but I just figured for the sake of size and detail and actual look amongst the armoring of the suit and whatnot, I would say they are pretty fun pieces to stand next to each other on screen and off. Being that Arkham City Batman here is part of a build-to-figure wave, I recognize that as a form of compromise for accessories, because a lot of that plastic needs to be allocated towards the Solomon Grundy pieces, so I was thinking to myself, what are they going to package in? They decided to throw in a decent grapple gun that does the job of dressing up the figure, especially when it comes to a little bit of the little etchings and details to make it a recognizable grapple from the Rocksteady games, but two things. One, no battering. How can a Batman not have a battering? I feel like that's a little bit insulting. I would have preferred that. And then when you compare the grapple gun to that of the Arkham Asylum and Arkham Knight versions that also come from McFarlane, it's not even it's almost damn near embarrassing. Sure, it's not as screen accurate. They're very much stylized after what looks cool in McFarlane's eyes, but I gladly would take that over this measly little grapple. I mean, Arkham City Batman here is going to get bullied. This is still very much a worthwhile figure because it is, after all, a reissue of the Arkham Asylum Batman from McFarlane, which I have categorized in a previous Top 5 McFarlane's video, in which I listed it as what, my number 3 or number 2 figure of McFarlane Batmans so far that I've collected. And that is a huge testament to say that Arkham City is pretty much filling that bill because it's for more or less the identical figure. And as such, it's definitely a worthwhile pickup if you, and this is a huge caveat, if you have in fact missed out on that original Arkham Asylum and you don't want to pay scalper prices at a vendor or through a third-party site online. It's definitely worth the price. With that said, I want to argue that there were some very clear missed opportunities to then improve on that original Arkham Asylum figure from McFarlane, especially when it comes to those points of articulation or the accessories, especially with how far we've come in levels of quality. And to see it just not being taken advantage of here with this reissue it's just a little saddening. I feel like they just could have done a little bit more. I respect the overhaul of the face as well as the bat symbol in the middle, but the complete overhaul on the cape and doing away with a level of quality for the utility belt as far as paint apps it leaves a lot to be desired. It kind of reminds me of how you had all the tools there to really invigorate the core perception of the product, only to then just kind of do some superficial things on the top and not really boil down to the mechanics of the overall deal to give people that have already dealt with that previous version of that thing a whole new experience and make it worthwhile that price. Okay, I feel like I'm projecting now. I'm gonna go ahead and move on to final verdicts, in which I'll give Arkham City Batman a 7 out of 10 if you already have Arkham Asylum Batman. If you never got the Arkham Asylum Batman and this is your first dive into not only McFarlane toys, but you kind of collecting all of the video game Batmans from this new DC Multiverse line, I would say it's amped up more to like an 8 out of 10, almost even a 9 out of 10. Just know going forward that there are some compromises from the paint in certain spots to that cape that could be subjective, but from my viewpoint, like I said, it leaves a lot to be desired. But for me, being a completist for all Batman figures and knowing that it could kind of complete the ensemble of Arkham City characters, still worthwhile pickup if you're a completist, and you can't deny he looks awesome here with the boys. And if you want to form your own band of Batman, then go ahead and use the link in the description over at Big Bad Toy Store. It helps out the channel quite a bit, and now you get your own Arkham City Batman in the process. Is he really worth picking up, or do you think you're just going to stick with your Arkham Asylum if you already own him? If you'd never owned the Arkham Asylum, will you be picking him up? Let me know all your guys' insights in the comment section below. If you enjoyed the video, hit the thumbs up button. If you want to see the reviews for the remaining Arkham City figures as well as that Solomon Grundy Mega Fig, then please subscribe, turn on notifications so you guys don't miss any of them. And of course, as always, stay humble. See you on the next one.